That was for Bob's benefit.
I've traded.
Just get here early.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here. Last week, I mentioned we'd be updating you on our legislative priorities and where they stand now that we're past halfway point of the session. So today, I'm joined by my legal counsel, Jay Johnson, to focus on public safety. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to talk about the situation we saw played out in South Burlington last week. From my perspective, what unfolded was totally preventable, with an injection of just a bit of common sense on the part of federal officials in particular. With that said, when South Burlington reached out for assistance from the state police, which was the right thing to do under the circumstances, we sent troopers to help out. And for the majority of the day, the protest was peaceful, which is what we were all striving for in order to keep people safe. I want to thank the South Burlington Police Department and our state police for their professionalism throughout an incredibly challenging situation. It's unfortunate things took a turn for the worse at the end of the day due to the tactics deployed by federal officials, which were unnecessary and ill-advised by Vermont law enforcement in general. But I also want to be clear. The actions of some to further agitate and escalate the situation was also unnecessary and put peaceful protesters in a situation many did not ask to be a part of. Our state police have a review of the protests underway, which will include taking a look at all of their body camera footage so we can better understand what worked well and where we need to improve going forward. This will take a bit more time, but we'll continue to be transparent as more details are available. Now, I'm sure you'll have more questions on that situation, but I'd like to bring you back to other important issues we need to continue to focus on that are important to the majority of Vermonters. We've made progress on public safety reform in the last couple of years, like restoring bail, modernizing a few drug and competency laws, record sealing, and requiring courts to expedite some hearings. But we still have much more work to do to make our criminal justice system work better and be more efficient. We've asked the legislature to focus on things like juvenile and repeat offenders, which Jay will talk about more in a minute, because when offenders are held accountable, victims are assured the justice system is working and communities are safer because of it. And we've seen this, the success of this with the accountability court we deployed in Burlington, which has been helpful to quickly address cases without offenders waiting for months between hearings, which often results in individuals reoffending before their initial case can be resolved. But the accountability court was just a short-term surge of resources, and we need to focus on addressing the underlying issues so offenders face consequences for their actions and get the help they need sooner rather than later. I'm appreciative of the Judiciary Committees for hearing testimony and beginning to move parts of what we propose, but like housing, I'm concerned it's not being taken seriously enough. Because the reality is, Vermonters asked us to focus on changes to make their communities safer. So as we approach the second half of the session, I hope the Judiciary Committees focus their attention on areas that will improve public safety and accountability without being distracted by federal issues which are not in our control. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jay.
Thank you, Governor, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jay Pershing Johnson, Governor Scott's legal counsel. If you can see me over the podium. For several years now, Governor Scott's team has brought the legislature comprehensive public safety agendas. These agendas are put together in response to concerns, as the governor said, that we hear from Vermonters and community members regarding violent crime, the influx of drugs, and chronic service-resistant repeat offenders. Our proposals are built on the experience of prosecutors, law enforcement, corrections officers, and representatives of victims who have lived with the consequences of a system that too often falls short. Our priority has been to refocus a system which has too long prioritized the interests of criminal offenders back to the safety of our communities and the integrity of a criminal justice system Vermonters can depend on. Every year, our public safety package gets introduced. Every year, the committee chairs divide it up and send fragments in different directions. Like housing, like energy affordability, sometimes they are debated and acted on partially, and often they receive no attention at all. Over time, the gap between the needs of our cities and towns and the piecemeal nature of the response becomes harder to explain to the communities we are here to protect. Take the issue of young adult offenders. We know, and the committees know, we have limited tools for holding violent juvenile offenders, meaning those under 19, or violent young adult offenders, 19 to 22, accountable for their crimes, except in criminal court. But most juvenile cases are heard automatically in family court, and many young adult offender cases are transferred to family court for treatment as youthful offenders. As we know, there is no permanent youth detention facility due to continued community resistance. In family court, conditions of release have virtually no teeth. Proceedings stretch across months, especially with the chronic court backlog, and offenders regularly age out of the system with no meaningful consequences. The entire purpose of swift justice, connecting actions to consequences for young people with developing brains, is being defeated. Our proposal, which we have brought to the legislature for multiple sessions, together with our proposal to repeal raise the age of juvenile jurisdiction to up to the age of 20, is to roll back current law to the youthful offender law in place from 2009 to 2019. This would require a conditional plea of guilty in criminal court before an offender can enjoy the benefits of family court. Instead, what passed out of House Judiciary, H642, is an effort to improve the process for revoking youthful offender status in family court. So that's fine as far as it goes, but it fails to address the need for real accountability before transfer to family court. And that's the point of 642. We asked for meaningful bail revocation standards for violations of court orders and conditions of bail. H409, which passed out of the House, clarifies that prosecutors may appeal a denial of a request to revoke bail. Again, fine, but this just kicks the can down the road and leaves development of a real workable standard to the courts in future cases, on a future timeline, with future victims. Pretrial supervision, originally proposed by the late Senator Sears, is a pretrial release tool we believe in and wanted to discuss with the committees in light of lessons learned from Chittenden Accountability Court. Supervised pretrial release is designed to help offenders comply with conditions of release, stay connected to services, and show up for court dates, especially when court hearings are routinely pushed out 30, 60, 90 days. We committed to fixing and funding build-out of the program, but the courts don't use it. Going into last Friday, it was my understanding it would be repealed and the funding would be scavenged. It now appears it will not be repealed or improved, in the House anyway, but the funding will be scavenged. I'm thankful to the House Judiciary Committee for passing out H410, a more meaningful definition of recidivism, which we have requested for several sessions now, with annual data reporting. There is the forensic facility and competency restoration for violent offenders, ideas being discussed since at least 2020. We need a secure setting where violent offenders with mental illness, developmental disabilities, or substance use disorders can receive appropriate care and have their competency restored, if possible, so they can stand trial. This year, we worked hard to narrow our proposal to cover only the most dangerous offenders charged with life offenses, like murder, aggravated sexual assault, kidnapping. Right now, we have 6 such offenders in Department of Corrections facilities. To date, they have been deemed not competent to stand trial, and these are individuals not eligible for hospital level of care. But they are receiving treatment and a stable environment where we hope to restore competency. In these cases, our laws provide limited tools for keeping our communities safe. We are grateful, in this case, to Senator Lyons, who introduced S-193, and to Senate Judiciary, who passed it out of committee after a thoughtful approach. This bill is still being deliberated in Senate committees. We are hopeful it will cross over to the House, where we know that it will have a long way to go. Finally, we propose the repeal of earn time and midpoint review, well-meaning policies intended to reduce the prison population that have placed administrative burdens on an already understaffed Department of Corrections, created uncertainty for victims about release dates, and distorted sentencing as an unintended consequence. Our proposal received no hearing so far this session. Similarly, we propose language to limit the authority of the courts to defer and suspend sentences for repeat violent offenders, and this has never come off the wall. The tools we're asking for are not radical. The problems communities are facing are real, and I look forward to working with the committees to move meaningful community safety legislation before the end of the session. Thank you. Governor?
Thank you, Jay. We'll now open it up to questions.
Governor, could you walk us through what took place last Wednesday from your perspective, your involvement with the operation in South Burlington, when you learned about it, what interactions you had with public safety officials, and what you signed off on, if anything?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I didn't have an integral part of it. They were well-versed themselves in what we had planned to do, which is to keep protesters and everyone there safe when it did evolve. The problem was nobody knew it was coming. We certainly didn't know. Local officials didn't know. I'm not sure anybody would have known had it not been for their tactics in the beginning. ICE from Boston came up, and there's a term for their extraction unit, but they came up, and I think they thought it was just going to be easy to apprehend the person and deport them possibly again. But what happened was there was an accident. The South Burlington Police Department responded, and then at that point found out that it was actually an ICE action. So things escalated a bit at that point, and they called in for more assistance. They called us to see if we could come out. We, of course, the commissioner and others, the colonel, made sure that the Wilson Barracks was notified, and they sent troopers out as quickly as they could. As time went on, as I said before, everything was fairly peaceful during the day, but things started building. As soon as they went to obtain a warrant, and this is the ICE officials from the judge, federal judge, at that point there was a gap, quite a time period. And I think things began to grow as people learned of the incident. More protesters were coming. So at that point, there was another team that we had for crowd control that was brought to the site, as well as I think Williston and Burlington. So that's when things got messier. I had no interaction other than to be notified of what was going on. But the state police, the commissioner, and others were in charge of the situation from our perspective. But again, this was a South Burlington issue. They were technically in charge.
When were you notified, by whom, and did at any point you provide feedback and either agree with or disagree with the plans that state police were making?
Well, again, this, we were in agreement along the way. We talked about this previously, how we would, because we had situations in Williston and Whitecap on how we would deal with this, and that was to keep a separation with federal officials and keep protesters safe. So we had a plan, a week or two in advance of this, so they just acted on the plan. So there wasn't any interaction with me to sign off on anything. They were acting appropriately.
So at no time did you say to public safety officials of the state that you agreed with their actions, that you supported them going in and helping ICE get into the house?
We had said from the very beginning, again, I wasn't asked that question specifically.
Were you told that was going to happen ahead of
let me
time?
answer the question. But we were told, we talked about this initially. Our charge was to keep everybody safe and to keep a separation between ICE and protesters so they could do their job. We can't impede federal action. So we did just that.
I'm not hearing an answer to the question that I've asked 3 times now, and I might just be missing it, but at any point did you, at the time of this, did you express agreement or disagreement with the plans that Vermont State Police was putting in place to go in and help ICE?
I did answer that. I said that they were, we had talked about this long before, what we were going to do and what we weren't, and I wasn't asked whether to give approval or disapprove of the actions taken at that point in time. I think it was evolving quickly, so I wasn't involved.
Do you agree with the decisions that Vermont State Police made in whole? Do you agree, did you, after the fact, do you think they made the right decision in going in and facilitating ICE's entry into the house?
I think we did what we could to keep everybody safe, and that was our charge.
From what I witnessed, there was no violence at the site until police attempted to enter the residence. The violence and the escalation that you've ascribed to the protesters took place, at least from what I saw and the videos that I saw, after police made the decision to enter the house, and that was an action that was facilitated by the Vermont State Police. Do I have that wrong?
As I said, we're doing an after-action review. We're looking at the body camera footage, and we'll have a better perspective than probably you had with some of the video you saw. I saw it as well, and we'll know the truth. We'll share that when we obtain it, but it's under review at this point.
So
And there's a
you've
lot
seen
of
some
body
video.
camera footage.
And you've seen some video, it sounds like.
Yes.
Is there anything that you've seen either in public footage or in footage that your staff has shown you that makes you question any tactics or decisions or actions by local or state police that day?
There was one in particular that I saw. It was a Burlington law enforcement, I believe, that took down one of the protesters that was trying to assist somebody else. I thought that went above and beyond. But
Can you
in
describe
terms,
that in more
but it,
detail? What do you think about the actions of that officer, and what do you think should happen to
I
that
don't.
officer?
I mean, again, they're doing their own. Burlington's doing their own after action. We're doing ours, and we'll have more to say about that when we finish. But right now, I'm not going to get involved in what should happen, what shouldn't happen at that point. We want to make sure in the future, because there's going to be probably future events, we want to make sure that we keep protesters who want to be there peacefully be safe.
Sounds like every agency is investigating itself in this situation. Is that right? Vermont State Police is investigating Vermont State Police actions. Burlington is investigating Burlington, South Burlington, South Burlington. Do you think that's sufficient, or do you think there should be some sort of external review, an independent investigation to the actions of the agencies and their troopers and police officers that day?
I believe that we'll come to some conclusion when all the after-action results come in, and then we can make that determination.
But is there anything at this point that's not being conducted by the agency whose conduct could be in question, and do you think that there should be? Do you think there should be some kind of an independent review or investigation?
At this point, I think we are doing our part, and we'll be able to determine a lot from the body camera footage that we have that will be reviewed.
So it sounds like you don't think there's. a
I
need for-
don't know until we see it.
Do you think that the Vermont State Police facilitating the federal police to get into the house, their entry into the house, is in violation of the state's fair and impartial policing policy?
I do not.
Can you elaborate on why not, Governor?
Well, again, as I said before, we were trying to keep protesters safe, and we can't impede federal action. So they were going into the house, they had a warrant to go into the house. So we had to make sure that we could facilitate them creating a distance as best we could between the protesters and the federal officials.
But the protesters were safe before ICE entered the house,
Well,
no?
but they were,
And you were
they
coordinating,
had a
your
warrant,
officers
they had
were
a
coordinating
warrant, they had a warrant to go in, right? Do you understand,
Yep.
you agree?
for a person who was not inside the house.
But they had a warrant from a federal judge to enter the building. You agree?
I agree.
Okay. And do you agree that we can impede a federal action?
I agree, but I also think that the
Then what
fair and
choice
impartial
do we
policing
have?
policy, if I have it right here, it does say you cannot impede a federal action. And I'm not asking you why you did not impede a federal action. I'm asking you why why your troopers chose to facilitate federal action when the fair and impartial policing policy says that though agencies, quote, have authority to enforce federal criminal law, ... is generally not a priority for an agency, ...
Again, in that moment, we're trying to protect the protesters. I believe that they wanted to prevent the federal officials from entering the building. They said so. I've heard statements to that effect. So we were doing what we could to make sure that they were safe because the federal officials weren't going to stand by and let them impede their actions.
Governor, I wasn't at the scene myself, but I did see pictures and videos of state troopers who had their faces covered, whose names weren't clearly displayed on what they were wearing, who didn't have their badges clearly displayed. Do you think that's how they should have operated?
I think, again, in the after-action review, we'll take a look at that. We've already talked about, I know the commissioners talked about, and the colonel, have talked about using different type of vests and coats and so forth to separate them from others, to make sure that they're visible. Again, we're going to learn a lot by this after-action review, how we can do things better.
Does this immigration action change your stance on S208 and S209, the two bills in the House now about civil arrests and law enforcement masking?
Well, again, we'll see where they go from here, and I think there's some possibly constitutional questions about that, but we'll take a look at that and we'll see what they do with it in the House as well.
Where they stand right now, would you sign those bills as they currently stand?
Well, they have to go through the whole process. They're going to go to the House next. They're just being passed out of the Senate, I believe, at this point, and then we'll see where it goes. I mean, I don't want to get ahead of it. We'll see where it goes in the other body.
Have you conveyed to ICE officials or DHS officials your concerns about what happened?
Yeah, I have not personally, but I know the colonel has. I don't know about the commissioner, but I know the colonel has.
Sorry, the colonel has, who is the colonel communicated this to?
Colonel Birmingham.
Right, but to who from the federal government?
From somebody from the, was it ERO? ERO.
Without the notes in front of me, I can't tell
Yeah.
you, but there was,
There were several communications between the colonel and various federal officials on the night of the action. And no, I have not had direct contact with them. There will come a time where that will happen, but right now, obviously, we're very consumed with trying to get the facts, because we tend to operate from a place of facts, not feelings and pre-assumptions about people's motives. So we are busy getting the facts together to do the best we can to present what we know at this point to our joint session tomorrow morning. But there will come a time where we will circle back to those federal officials. And I would also point out that the governor said it was a couple of weeks that we had been planning. We had actually been planning, and we had met with our federal partners, including ERO out of Boston, in February, because seeing the events in Minneapolis, we began planning with South Burlington, Williston, Burlington, and I believe a couple other communities, Brattleboro and a couple others, the places that we presumed might be the site of any federal enforcement action. We began that planning in January, and we convened a meeting in February of our federal partners, both federal partners that are based here in Vermont and federal partners from the Boston regional office. So we believed that we had done the good work to sow good relationships in advance of this event, and we believed that we would get information, maybe not far in advance, but that we would get a heads up on any actions that were going to happen. And as the governor said, that did not happen. So there will come a time where we'll follow back, we'll circle back up, but this week is not the time.
What specifically do you think ICE should have done differently?
I think that it's too soon for me to weigh in on what I think ICE should have done differently, but I want to come back to two things you said. That one is, it's very clear from your line of questioning that you have an opinion and a predisposition that the purpose of the state police critical action team was to, quote, facilitate the actions of ICE. That is not what their purpose was. It was to protect everyone, including ICE agents, with a warrant. And let's back up a little bit. What do we know? We knew that day that ICE was trying to pick up a target and that a car crash scenario, including intentional ramming of federal agents and crashing into a citizen, uninvolved, driving, minding their own business on the street, and crashing into other vehicles in an attempt to flee into a home had occurred. Those are crimes. So we can stop the line of questioning that there was only a civil immigration action afoot.
When did
Assaulting,
I say there was only a civil immigration?
that's the line of questioning that I heard you asking the governor, and I've heard others asking about facilitating ICE's civil immigration actions. So when you talk about the fair and impartial policing policy, our first priority inside that policy and beyond, like our raison d'etre, is to keep the community safe. It would be really easy to do that if there was one policy interest in play. For instance, if our only policy interest on March 11th was to protect ICE agents, that's easy. If it was only to protect protesters, that might be easy. If it was only to protect our own troopers and local police officers, the list can go on and on. We have competing policy interests that involve protecting all of those groups that were present, and to uphold the rule of law, which is the enforcement of legal process that is signed by a judge. And there's competing policy interests all wrapped up into that incident. And so it's really overly simplistic to look at a highly trained team that is intentionally creating a corridor so that ICE agents and the Vermonters, for the most part, can't swear to it, but are not in conflict. We knew that day that ICE was going to execute the warrant. The South Burlington police chief, you have heard in his public remarks, asked them to rethink and perhaps another day, like to back down. They made it very clear they were executing the warrant. We have seen what their ambition nets us in other parts of the country. And if you fast forward to the end of the evening, I think you and I have discussed this, when they came to extricate the vehicle, so I'm getting ahead of myself in the story, but I think it proves the point. When they came back to extricate the vehicle, the tactics they used were not what we recommended, which was tow trucks. And that's when Vermonters and police officers appeared to be getting hurt, right? So the action of providing a safe corridor to perform a lawful law enforcement action was a public safety function. And to say it was anything but is showing that you're looking at one policy interest only. And we have to look at it from up on the balcony at all the policy interests that we're trying to resolve that day. So we absolutely do not believe that we violated the fair and impartial policing policy. We were the earliest adopters. I personally worked on writing that policy back in the 08s, 09s, sitting down with Will Lambeck at his office on North Winooski Avenue. So it's deeply steeped in our ethos and in our operations. I think that there's a couple of lines of questions that keep coming up, and I'm sure they'll come up tomorrow morning. We're happy to answer them to the best we can. We still have a long way to go, as the governor has said, in our after-action review. But I think what folks need to really keep forefront is police officers were put, local and state police officers were put in an extraordinarily difficult position balancing multiple policy interests. And if you really go to the balcony and look at the outcome, there were no serious injuries and no deaths. And that has not been the case in some of these other encounters that went violent quickly. And having been involved myself in protests over 28 years of policing, I can tell you that it goes like that. And there's a lot of reasons why it turns from peaceful to rowdy or boisterous to violent. And that really, over the course of a long day, only happened in the course of executing a warrant. And I think that when we forget to acknowledge the good work that was done in many, many ways, and we focus only on small pieces of it, then we're being overly simplistic. We're going to have a lot more to say, and we will invite the public scrutiny. We will invite the questions because it helps us get better, and that's what we want to do. We don't, knock on wood, we don't have to deploy the critical action team much, and it's not something we respond to that scale of a protest regularly. So we're going to learn a lot. The governor, even before this event happened, as we were doing that planning back in January, we had already identified that we needed higher visibility shirts for hot weather, jackets for cold weather, literally fluorescent, high visibility, not just so troopers know who's a trooper, but that say state trooper, not police on the back, because as you saw, some of the federal agents had name identification on the back that just said police. Some had ERO or ICE or whatever, but we want to ensure that our people are highly visible to one another and to the public. We invite being held accountable for our actions on the playing field. So that was something we had already identified back in February when we were assuming that this was inevitable. And we also identified the need to have the soft name tags, not metal, not the things that poke into your uniform, et cetera. So those are all things that we had been working with already, and you will see those recommendations in the eventual after action report. But I think we have to be. We walked what I believe was a very clear, fair line in the face of many competing interests. And I think that the outcome, though many people I think don't know what they saw, because it's true that when you look at some of the video, you can see the Vermont State Police patches. They were all wearing patches, and some of the troopers were in the full regular go-to-patrol uniform. The critical action team all had insignia on both arms, but in rapidly moving sequences on some of the video, you can see that drab kind of muted green does look a lot like what some of the federal partners showed up in with external vest carriers. So you have to look and know in some cases to see who was actually throwing flashbangs and who was doing what. And so I think I think it's fair that some reasonable people, not people who are going to back the police no matter what, and not people who are going to criticize the police no matter what, but I think that swath of onlookers and people who've seen video have reasonable questions about who took what actions. And so that's another reason why we want to make sure our people are completely identifiable, because we are willing and able to hold them accountable if they do things that are outside our expectations, policy, and training.
So, Commissioner, just to back up something you said earlier in that answer, you said that state police troopers, I believe the words used were they intentionally created a corridor to allow for the ICE officers to enter the building. They presumably did that following some communication with ICE, and in so doing, by creating that corridor through the protesters, how is that not facilitating ICE's entry into the residence?
I think you're playing a word game, candidly. I think that,
How is that playing a word game? I'm describing a situation.
Paul, you're
here.
using the word facilitating. You've used it 10 times. I understand what the word means. That's the way you choose to view it. That's your vantage point. I could use another word and they would mean the same thing. We chose to protect the ICE agents from the protesters and the protesters from the ICE agents because we knew, as I just said to you, that they were going in come hell or high water. And we have seen in other parts of the country that if we withdrew, ICE would have used other tactics to break through the crowd. And we presumed that Vermonters would be hurt or harmed by those tactics. And using a highly trained team that is meant to carefully move people. Now, peaceful protesters have no problem being peacefully moved in a coordinated effort. Agitators don't like it and press back and sucker punch troopers and things like that. So using a highly trained team to create a very narrow corridor to allow the agents to do their job was our decision to protect the public and protect the agents and to uphold the rule of law.
It sounds like, based on both your remarks and Governor Scott yours, it sounds like you find fault with a number of the protesters who were there. Is that accurate? Is this a both sides situation where they were at fault as well?
I think we'll find that out when we get to the end of the story. So I'm not standing here in front of you saying that no troopers or police officers did anything wrong. I don't know that to be the case yet, and I, as the arbiter of discipline for the department, for the state police, have to wait until all the facts are on the table, and that takes time, right? So I'm not standing here saying that nobody did anything wrong on our side of the team. I was responding specifically to the part about the choice to make the corridor and to move protesters so that the agents could get to the house without a confrontation happening along the way. So I'm not ascribing blame. I, as a citizen, I can tell you that I've seen some of the video as well. And if you were to say do a time-lapse video of what the protesters looked like in the morning when the first call to action went out, and they're singing and they're grilling hot dogs and they're doing very Vermonty protesting things, and trust me, I've seen a lot of these. I've seen the range of protests in my career, from the very Vermonty ones. Think the honkin' waves that we're seeing around the state. Think the groups at the UU Church at the top of Church Street, Church in Pearl, that met every Friday to protest the war, the Iraq War, right? I mean, I'm thinking of those types of things. That's like a category that was on display in South Burlington. I've seen hundreds of those in Burlington. There's a middle type of protest in my experience, and those are ones that get a little bigger, a little more aggressive. Sometimes people who aren't part of the core group join. I'm thinking of the ones that don't communicate with law enforcement when it becomes clear something's happening and we're trying to help them stay safe. They take over intersections, they get off the sidewalk into Main Street or wherever, and law enforcement is in a difficult position trying to protect them because there's not communication. These, I would say, are more boisterous, rowdier protests, and we've seen many of those in Burlington, but not as many as the first type. And then there's the third type that I have been had experience with, which are protests where protest tactics change and shift to either wish to claim space, like to encroach upon a place that they've been denied entry to, or to do something else, I guess, to get attention and agitate to make a point. And those generally tend to involve shoving, spitting, throwing projectiles. Sometimes those are fecal matter or urine or soda bottles or rocks, and taking other actions that are aggressive. They are not First Amendment protesting, expressing my opinion. And those are the three types of protests that I've had experience with in my career, and I think you saw all three of those play out last week.
And did you say that third category, I guess the bad protester category,
Well, that's your characterization.
Did you see any of that activity taking place prior to Vermont State Police and ICE going onto the property where they had permission to stand?
I don't have a full timeline, and I haven't watched, like, you know, the whole, whatever, what
But
is
so
it, 10
far you
hours
haven't
of...
seen anything?
I'm not prepared to answer that question in terms of the timeline of how that went. I've seen footage from, you know, various hours of the day, but I have not seen like a progressive. I can't answer that right now.
We're going to switch
Governor?
over to the phones now. So that
Can I
focus
just
on
ask
the
one
live.
more quick question,
I
Governor?
think we're going to switch over to the phones because we're running a little short on time. Keith Whitcomb, Rutland Herald.
Hi, thank you. Earlier this week, Rutland City officials were putting their heads together to talk about how they might respond should there be something like what happened in South Burlington with ICE and protesters. I was curious if you've had any conversations with the Rutland City leadership or any other one of the larger municipalities about anything like that, what to do, what they can expect from you guys or not, or whatever the situation is.
Sure, Keith, thank you for that question. I am not aware that we've had that conversation, but that would not necessarily rise to my level. That is an operational detail that our special teams captain and various levels of command would interface with first. But I can tell you that we are, outside of this discussion of protests, we are working very closely with Rutland officials and talk to them regularly, both in the police side and the city government side, as we move the accountability docket pilot project to Rutland. So there is direct access and regular communication happening. I'm not aware that that conversation has happened, but it would have happened with one of our leadership inside the state police. And if you want to know, I can ask the question and get back to you.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Kevin, 7 days.
Thank you very much. Governor, could you just speak a little bit more about where you see protesters going from being protesters to agitators? Because I will note that your very first statement that you put out about this incident focused on quote-unquote agitators as being one of the key sources of the escalation here. So where do you see people going from peaceful protest to agitators, specifically?
Yeah, Kevin, I think we'll see more with the after-action report and seeing through the body cameras. I will say when our folks were trying to descale and trying to extricate themselves from the situation because ICE had left, they came and broke the back window of a state police vehicle and tried to climb in. So I would count that as a possible agitator.
That makes sense. But would you count people locking arms, attempting to prevent ICE agents from entering the home to be agitators, or are those protesters?
No, I would say that they are protesters. Again, I think there's going to be. We'll see when the body cameras footage should tell us a lot. But I've heard reports of, the spitting, the shoving, maybe, as the commissioner had said, maybe a sucker punch here or there on law enforcement. And I think hopefully we'll find out that they maintained discipline and didn't react to that. But those are the types of things we're looking for and to see. Because, again, for the most part, for the whole day, everything was going as well as could be expected under the conditions that we didn't deal these cards, that the ICE federal agents did. But at that point, we had an obligation, we felt, and we've talked about this a lot, to make sure everybody's protected, and that's what we did. So, again, we'll see when the body camera footage comes back to see if there were agitators, as we expect there were.
Governor, could you tell us more about
We're going to stick with people on the phone. Sorry. We'll come back to you. Go ahead, Kevin.
Well, my last question would be, sir, during the Vietnam era, President Nixon used the phrase outside agitators to delegitimize many of the protests that were going on in the country at that time. And the use of your use of the term agitators, did you use that to sort of delegitimize the protest that was going on, or was it specifically targeted at the bad actors that you felt crossed the line?
No, I think I say that they were possibly bad actors that crossed the line. But again, we'll see from the footage. I encourage people to exercise their First Amendment right. I think about, I talked about this a little bit in one of our staff meetings. My mom lives in Florida. She is a staunch Republican, has been her entire life. She's going to be 90 in about 3 weeks. But she really is bothered by everything she's seeing across the country at this point in time. And she said to me, she said, I don't know what to do. I need to do something. She said, I don't think I can go out there and protest. I've never been to a protest in my life, but I'm thinking I need to do something and I don't know what it is. And I think there are my point is, I think there are a lot of people out there that need to do something. They're so frustrated with what they're seeing and they want to take some sort of action. But I'd say the vast majority of them who want to do that want to do so peacefully. We've seen it in other, the commissioner had mentioned, I mean, I used to walk down through or see them at the Montpelier post office every Friday. And that was a peaceful type of protest, showing their dissatisfaction with their government. And again, this is something that I encourage. It's one of our fundamental rights, but we just want to make sure that people are safe when they do it.
Can I follow up on that, Governor?
Sure.
It strikes me that in that question where you're asking if the governor was delegitimizing the protest, it kind of belies the fact. I mean, the Vietnam, I wasn't around for that. Sorry. I mean, I wasn't old enough to know anything about it, about the protest. But we seem to be forgetting that the police officers and the troopers who were tasked with protecting everyone are Vermonters. We are a tiny state. This is a medium-sized city anywhere else in the country, right? Probably every police officer there knew someone in the crowd. We're all so interconnected. Like, these are not, crews trying to come in and inflict harm. They are trying to protect their community. They are community members. So let's just get back to the Vermontiness of this. We are able to scale up or down a response as the situation dictates, fortunately. As I said already, we don't frequently have to do this type of crowd control or crowd movement. But let's not forget that the people doing those very difficult jobs are members of these communities, they are coaches in these communities, and we're all in this together trying to navigate a really difficult time. So the dehumanization piece or the devaluing, I think we should just take that right off the table.
Ed Barber, Newport Daily Express.
Good afternoon, Governor. I got on a few minutes late, so I hope this question hasn't been answered yet. But as law enforcement are reviewing the tapes, will they also be looking to identify protesters who stepped over the line, who might have sucker punched a law enforcement officer, thrown something, broken something, things of that nature, where it goes, it's not a First Amendment right, but in fact it's a violation of the law. So will you be taking that extra step to try to identify and charge those individuals?
That's not our priority right now. I don't believe that that's a mission that we are taking on unless something egregious comes up and the person is identifiable. But obviously there's going to be multiple reviews of the footage that we have. Our first priority is to fully understand and be able to be accountable to the public for the timeline, decision points, and actions that our troopers took. But your question, It's a little bit the bookend of my Boston Globe friend's initial line of questioning, which is that for every person who saw those actions in South Burlington and have the filter on it that you appear to be coming at it with, Paul.
Excuse me?
The questions were making pre-assumptions of what.
I'd appreciate if you wouldn't make assumptions about.
Okay, I'll make no assumptions. For every person who looked at that situation and believed that the police were in the wrong, there are the equal number of people watching that situation saying, why didn't the police do more to maintain law and order and to do exactly what this caller just said, which is to identify wrongdoers and hold them accountable for breaking the law. So again, lots of competing policy interests here, and the lens that people are looking at this through will indicate what their predisposition is and what their line of questioning is. We are going to try and get you all the facts, get them all out on the table so that we can deal from a position of facts, timelines, and evidence, and we will make adjustments, recommendations for any future event going forward. But no, identifying lawbreakers is not currently a priority, and I really can't imagine that that's going to become one in this circumstance.
Tom Davis? Go ahead, Ed.
No, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Davis, Compass Vermont.
Thank you. No questions today.
We love to hear that. Thanks, Tom. We'll go back to the room.
Governor, House Education is struggling to find any consensus on a proposal, crossovers later this week. What is your team doing to move the ball forward?
Yeah, obviously we're meeting with them to try and encourage them to move forward with something. And if that doesn't work, we also have the Senate who could move forward with a plan, a map of some sort, and to keep the ball rolling. But the process has to continue. This is just unsustainable. And for those who are just advocating we do nothing, they're in favor of raising the cost of living in Vermont and property taxes in particular across the board. So we have to do something.
I think Charlotte was trying to get a question.
Yeah, I'm wondering, a House committee advanced a bill last week that tightens restrictions on firearms in Vermont, makes it illegal to possess a machine gun in Vermont. It was divided among party lines in the committee. I'm wondering what you think about that bill if you'd sent it in the
Yeah, we'll see where it goes. Again, it's moving from one body to the other, and we'll see what they do with it then. There is one provision, you mentioned it, the mental health, that gives me a little bit of a pause, and I communicated that with my team this morning, but I'm concerned that just associating mental health with losing your firearms is going to send a message to some to not seek help. And we've seen this type of thing before, and I'm just concerned because I've talked a lot about equating mental health with physical health, and that they should be the same, that we should treat them the same. And here we are doing something different. And I understand why, and I know that they put in provisions to make sure that it wasn't anybody just seeking help, but I know people will hear that if you have a mental health issue, don't get flagged because you will probably lose your weapons, your guns. And a lot of people take great pride in hunting and so forth, but they would just, I think that would have an adverse effect.
But these are people that a court has ordered to
Yeah,
treatment.
and I acknowledge that. Again, we haven't seen how the bill is going to work its way through, but I'm telling you, the average Vermonter is going to hear, if you have a mental health issue, you may lose your weapons. So we just have to work our way through that and see what the solution is. The other parts aren't problematic. I think the machine gun is a federal law, so we would just be mimicking federal law. So that's not something consequential.
On the school consolidation issue, do you still feel strongly that if it's not mandated, that, as you said in your State of the State, you're going to veto the budget?
No, I said, again, I'm going to keep all my cards close, but what I said was I'm not going to advance anything that doesn't include some provision for that. So it could be the education bill, or it could be the budget. So we will use any means we can to try and protect taxpayers.
I guess what I'm wondering is that mandatory provision still the red line? That there has to be some mandatory process for school consolidation,
Yes.
otherwise it's not worth it.
Absolutely. Right. Yes. I mean, we have to come up with a district plan.
Commissioner Morrison, I'm sorry I didn't get this question out before you sat down. You mentioned a very important distinction in the model fair and impartial policing policy between civil immigration enforcement situations and criminal immigration enforcement situations. Were you consulted at all last Wednesday about whether what was happening constituted a criminal immigration enforcement situation?
Can you be more clear? Like,
Consulted by Colonel Birmingham or anyone else about whether this was a criminal immigration enforcement situation?
we were clear that it started as a civil immigration enforcement, that the ERO team came from Boston to serve an administrative type warrant for aggravated reentry. So we were clear that that started as a civil issue. When people assault federal officers, we assume that that becomes a criminal inquiry. So the information we had at the time is that federal officers had been assaulted by vehicular ramming, and that they were going to the court to seek a warrant for arrest and a search warrant for the home. So that's the information we had on the ground. But no, the federal officials did not consult us at all, as I think you've heard repeatedly from Chief Bro.
Right, but your response about, well, in part, facilitate is a term in the section about criminal immigration enforcement. And so it sounds like there was a determination at some point that this had shifted into criminal immigration enforcement.
It didn't matter to us because our public safety function was the same. So be clear that the preeminent purpose of our facilitating a corridor for the agents to get through was to preserve the public's safety, and that was all the actors that were there, no one group. So it didn't matter. We weren't going to be part of their search warrant, their arrest warrant, even if it was a criminal warrant, which, by the way, they didn't show to us before. So we can only operate with the information we had at the time, but the distinction between criminal and civil, I believe, is an important one when we think about what police might have done if we had gone in and helped them execute the warrant. But that's not what happened in any way. My comment was meant to say that if it's a criminal immigration action, the policy sort of is off the table. But assault on a federal officer isn't really an immigration action at all, is it? It's just a criminal investigation at that point. So it's neither here nor there from the perspective that the purpose of our team was to protect the public's safety and to respond to the request of the city of South Burlington that their resources had been overwhelmed. So it's a bit of maybe a theoretical discussion to have for another day because it didn't drive any of our decision making in real time. And I'm sorry if I confused the issue by mentioning that, but there is a distinction in the policy between civil immigration actions and the investigation of crimes and criminal immigration matters.
And we have, we're at 1 o'clock, we have time for one more question, and I'm happy to help with any follow-ups after.
Well, it does sound like you're saying that so the team would respond, the state troop team would respond in a civil immigration situation if there was a similar concern about public safety or safety of the officers in the way it did on Wednesday and create that sort of corridor. You're saying that was not dependent on...
Of it being civil or criminal. It was not dependent on the offense, the underlying offense. It was dependent on the situation on the ground, which was the concern that protesters might harm ICE agents and ICE agents might use tactics that could result in injury or worse to the protesters.
Given the gravity of the situation, if we could ask maybe just a couple more questions, I think it'd be really helpful. Governor, I know that 3 people, as you know, were detained last Wednesday, none of whom were mentioned in that warrant. Do you have views on the outcome of their cases, what should happen to them. One of them has been released. 2 of them remain in jail. What are your thoughts about those 3 individuals?
Well, again, that's up to the courts at this point, in the U.S. Attorney's Office. But from my perspective, I think they should be released if they're not under a criminal investigation of some sort.
And in terms of the information that will be released to the public following these reviews, can you commit to releasing all investigative material produced by the state police in this review to the public and to the press? Governor?
Again, it will depend. It will depend on whether we'll see what's in the information. I'm trying to think of a situation. We want to protect the innocent as well. Those who are there protesting peacefully. We wouldn't want to implicate them in any way. So there may be situations. I just don't know at this point until we see it.
But can you commit at this point to releasing the maximum amount of information possible?
We're going to try and be as transparent as we possibly can. Yes.
Governor, have you spoken to the president at all about
No.
this? Do you plan to?
No.
There's just one other bill I wanted to ask about. It's related to this, but I think it's moving to the Senate right. I think it's in Finance S235, the vehicle for changes to Act 181. The Senate's considering. I just do you think that what's in that bill right now goes far enough to get your signature, or is there more that you think needs to be in there? And as the bills are written right now.
Well, again, it's still in flux at this point. So we'll see. It's moving in the right direction. Let me just say that, and we'll see what happens as it moves its way through the process, the legislative process. But it's moving in the right direction. All right. Thank you all very much.